Hi, this is Dr. Victoria Nalule, and today I want to talk about climate change litigation. So, with climate change, we already know climate change first is caused by humans due to our activities that lead to an escalation in greenhouse gas emissions and the various impacts of climate change. We're seeing floodings in different countries. We're seeing heat waves. We're seeing wildfires, droughts. All those are some of the impacts of climate change. And as such, different people take different initiatives to see how they can address climate change. Besides the usual things of mitigation, reducing on the emissions, and also adaptation, where people are adapting to the impacts of climate change, we also need to ask ourselves which other initiatives can people take to ensure that the emissions are reduced drastically. So one of the ways, first, it's through protests. We have seen a lot of protests from climate change activists, NGOs, or even local communities. Protests to the effect that companies that are polluting should stop. Protests to the effect that there should be a reduction in the use of fossil fuels, and also protests to ensure that governments and other policymakers take action to be able to address climate change. So that's one way. But also the other way, besides the protests, it's through climate change litigation. And with climate change litigation, these are basically legal actions that are brought by either individuals, NGOs, climate change activists, or even other interested parties, which are forcing companies to stop emissions or even requiring companies that are polluting to pay. That is under the premise of the polluter pays principle, or even asking governments to take action to reduce climate change. So, in today's discussion, that is going to be the focus, which is climate change litigation. So I've already introduced myself. I'm Dr. Victoria Nalule, and today I'll be talking about climate change litigation. So what is climate change litigation about? First, by introduction, climate change litigation basically refers to the legal actions addressing the causes and impacts of climate change. So it involves governments, corporations, or individuals. So individuals or even NGOs can bring legal suit, a legal suit or legal cases against the government, against the corporation with respect to climate change. And even corporations themselves, they can bring a legal action against, let's say, NGOs who are becoming a nuisance because they're trying to address climate change. So either way, climate change litigation refers to the legal actions that are addressing the causes and impacts of climate change. So it's driven by the need to ensure justice for the planet, because with climate change, we know it's the human activities that are leading to climate change. And as a result, it's the planet that is suffering. The planet, the people within the planet, the plants, then animals, nature generally is being impacted as a result of the human activities that are associated with climate change. So in summary, we can say that climate change litigation is driven by the justice aspect, whereby we need to ensure that we achieve justice for the planet. And who's going to fight for the planet? If it's not people, then no one else. So, with the people who are involved in climate change litigation, they're basically seeking for justice for the planet, to ensure that the environment is protected, justice to ensure that we reduce on the activities that are leading to greenhouse gas emissions, and also justice in a way that the corporations that are polluting are able to pay for their pollution. So it's more of a polluter pays principle. And then why is climate change litigation important? Obviously, it's important because we are in an era where we cannot deny the impacts of climate change. We are in an era where pollution is so rampant, and as a result, we're experiencing various impacts associated with climate change, like floodings. Many people are losing their lives because of floodings. Many people are migrating because of droughts, because they can no longer stay in the environment that they used to stay in. They can no longer fit there because of the climate change impacts like droughts. Many people are losing their lives and even property because of the wildfires. So all the various impacts of climate change are having an impact on humans, they're having an impact on the planet, animals, and also on the property and our economic activities. So as a result, climate change becomes very important because it's a way to address the impacts of climate change by ensuring that we reduce on the emissions, ensuring that the people who are polluting are held accountable, people or even corporations that are polluting are held accountable. And also, climate change litigation is very important in that it ensures that the necessary laws and policies are being developed to protect the environment, because there are some countries that might be reluctant to even enact climate change laws or even to implement environmental laws for countries that already have their environmental laws. So it becomes necessary that through climate change litigation, the governments, policymakers are held accountable with respect to enacting the laws, but also implementing them. And also, it really ensures that the government and policymakers are acting, because you could have the laws in place, you could have the policies in place, but you don't even have the institutions to ensure that the laws are being implemented. So all those things become very relevant, and as such, climate change litigation is able to achieve that. But also through climate change litigation, it's a way of raising awareness, especially by ensuring that people know their rights, their legal rights, a right to a healthy environment, a right to be in an environment that is free from pollution. All those are legal rights that climate change litigation can spotlight. So in so doing, it can raise awareness through the various cases and scholarly work, and which awareness would be or is very influential or impactful, especially for the young generation, to know that they can always be legal action for companies that continuously pollute. So, what are the main drivers of climate change litigation? The first driver, obviously, the broad driver for climate change litigation is the need to address climate change, because climate change is real. The impacts of climate change are real. People are dying, human rights are being infringed upon because of climate change. So the main broader driver is to address climate change. And through addressing climate change, we're saying that we need to reduce on the emissions. The companies that are emitting have to stop emitting, or they have to reduce on their emissions. And then also we need to ensure that people on the planet are well prepared to adapt to the impacts of climate change, because the impacts of climate change are already there, they're undeniable. But how are people prepared to adapt to those impacts of climate change? So, climate change litigation also is driven by the need to ensure that people are well prepared financially and also socially to be able to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And then the other important thing, climate change litigation is also driven by the need to protect human rights, because we already mentioned that the different impacts of climate change do directly infringe on people's rights. Like a right to life is being infringed upon because of our climate change impacts. A right to a healthy environment is being infringed upon because of climate change impacts. A right to shelter is being infringed upon because when you have floods, it's going to destroy property. It's going to destroy lives, destroy property, and as a result, many people are going to be left homeless. So all those really are human rights that are directly impacted by climate change. So there's also a need to ensure that companies are held accountable, especially the companies that are polluting should be able to uh, be should be held accountable for all the pollution that they are putting into our environment. So they should be held accountable, they should be able to pay for their pollution, and also they should be able to put measures in place to ensure that they reduce on their emissions. So basically, those are the main drivers of climate change litigation. So we have various examples when it comes to climate change litigation, and we have seen that NGOs, environmental NGOs, have always been at the forefront of climate change litigation. But however, there are even other individuals that have brought cases with respect to climate change. But an example that I wanted to refer to in this presentation is the Greenpeace example, because Greenpeace is an NGO, environmental NGO, that has been at the forefront of climate change litigation. They have brought various legal actions in different countries, and these are often driven by the need to protect the environment and also by the need to ensure that there is a reduction on the emissions. So Greenpeace is actively engaged in legal challenges related to climate change, including cases against governments and corporations. They also aim to protect the freedom of speech and ensure that people also have the freedom to protest. And the cases that involve Greenpeace often involve questions of free speech and the right to protest, particularly in the context of environmental activism. And through this climate change litigation, Greenpeace always aims to hold the polluters accountable. So this is just an example of an NGO that has been actively involved in climate change litigation, and various cases have been brought in different countries. So we have some examples of climate change litigation. We have the case of Energy Transfer v. Greenpeace, where Greenpeace was found liable for defamation, trespass, nuisance, and civil conspiracy in a North Dakota lawsuit over the Dakota Access Pipeline protests. And the jury ordered Greenpeace to pay over $660 million in damages. So this case of Energy Transfer v. Greenpeace is important because now it's raising concerns of how climate change litigation can be reversed. Because initially with climate change litigation, we are used to saying that it's the NGOs or environmental organizations and activists that are bringing cases against corporations or even the governments. But with the case of Energy Transfer v. Greenpeace, we're seeing a new lane whereby even the corporations can sue environmental organizations or NGO in instances where their actions, especially through protests, have caused damage to them. So with climate change litigation, or even with the protests that environmental protests that have been held in different countries, there is now a need to be very cautious of the type of protest you're putting up. Ensure that the protest will not lead to defamation. Because if you do, we shall have a reverse of climate change litigation where the corporation itself now will be suing the individuals or even the NGO that is involved in those defamatory protests regarding climate change. So this is the case of Energy Transfer v. Greenpeace. It's an example of how corporations can also hold environmental NGOs liable for their actions, liable for their environmental protests, because it's not just enough for you to go out there and say that you want to protect the environment, you're going to protest to protect the environment. But if you're doing that by giving out wrong information, which wrong information is going to lead to defamation and damages to the property of the corporation that you're trying to fight, then you have to be aware that the corporation could still sue you. And this is a reverse of the climate change litigation. We're not used to this kind of cases. So in recent years, we have to be very careful when we're talking about litigation concerning climate change, because that litigation can either be against a corporation or government, or the corporation itself can sue climate change activists or even environmental NGOs for defamation and other damages that are caused due to that NGOs' activities, especially protests that have led to damages. So we need now to be very careful when you're talking about climate change litigation, because it's no longer the NGOs that are running after the corporations or governments. The reverse is true. So we have to be very careful there. And then there's also the case of Juliana v. United States, where the youth plaintiffs sued for future generations' rights. That's the case that is really good to look at, because it talks about the need for to protect the future generation, the aspect of sustainability. How are you protecting the present generation, but also thinking about the future generation? So that's another case that is really good that you could look at. And then also we have the 2021 case involving Shell, where a Dutch court ordered Shell to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. So this is obviously directly connected to climate change, because with climate change, we know that one of the ways to address climate change is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So in this case, the Dutch court ordered Shell to reduce its carbon dioxide emissions. And also we have this case of Urgenda Foundation v. Netherlands of 2015, where the courts ordered government cut emissions. So this is another case that we're saying that the government could still be ordered to ensure that they have measures and strategies in place that are aimed at reducing on the emissions. So there are various there are various climate change litigation cases that you should look out for, especially in your countries, and see how effective those cases are. Is it mostly cases against corporations, like let's say oil companies, cases against governments, ordering governments to take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or sometimes it's even cases against environmental organizations or NGOs, or even climate change activists, like in this case we saw of Energy Transfer v. Greenpeace. So there are various cases that you should be able to look out for. So, in climate change litigation, what are the main legal arguments that are used? The first one will be the violation of a constitution or human rights, because remember, in most countries, the constitution would refer to a right to a healthy and clean environment. So, if that right is infringed upon, then the plaintiff would have the legal basis to file for climate change litigation or to proceed with climate change litigation. And then also with respect to human rights, remember we have a right to life, and we already mentioned that um, most of the rights are directly infringed upon due to climate change impacts, like floods, heat waves, wildfires. So that's also another legal ground or even legal argument to bring a case under climate change litigation. And then breach of environmental laws or treaties. If a country is party to international instruments or even international treaties aimed at protecting the environment, or even climate change treaties, and the country breaches those treaties, then they can be sued. So that's why it's very important for countries, especially developing countries, to look closely at the kind of treaties they're signing, international instruments they're signing. Are they really well prepared to ensure that the provisions in those treaties are implemented in their countries? If not, we could see a rise in climate change litigation cases where individuals or even NGOs can hold governments liable for breach of the international treaties that they're signing. So countries shouldn't sign treaties blindly, especially if a treaty is legally binding. You shouldn't sign it blindly, because at the end of the day, you could be held liable for breach of that treaty. And then our negligence and nuisance claims. Also, still with climate change litigation, we can see instances where legal arguments can relate to negligence. And then the duty of care principle, obviously, for the corporations that are polluting the environment, first they have a duty of care to protect them, to protect their people. especially in the communities where they're working from. So if they're continuously polluting the environment through gas flaring, oil spills, that means that they are breaching their duty of care, and as such, they can be held liable. So in your free time, you could look at more cases in different countries. We have the case in Australia relating to Gloucester Resources Limited v. Minister of Planning. We also have a case in the Netherlands relating to Algenda Foundation v. State of the Netherlands. And then the case in German, that's a case you could look at. I still in the Netherlands, there are more cases against Shell, and then in the USA, there's also cases. In Pakistan, there are different cases, and also in your different countries, wherever you are, try to find out any legal cases relating to environmental protection or cases that directly relate to climate change protection, all those fall under climate change litigation. So obviously climate change litigation has various advantages, but it also has some challenges. For instance, proving of causation and harm. Sometimes the people who are um, who are so enthusiastic about bringing legal cases, they can hardly prove causation or even harm, that harm has been caused due to the activities of the corporation that is polluting. And sometimes some of these institutions or NGOs lack the legal standing, especially if they are the plaintiffs. As such, they need to work closely with the local communities. And then also we have the political and judicial resistance. Where there is no political will in a country to protect the environment, then it would also be hard for that country to be able to enhance or even embrace climate change litigation. That's why sometimes you see that some activists, environmental activists, or even climate change activists are treated as they're treated as criminals in some countries, and that shouldn't be the case. Because at the end of the day, these are people who are trying to protect the environment, but also them, as you're protecting the environment, make sure you do the right thing. Don't politicize your activities, environmental activities. So when it comes to climate change litigation, we see a lot of political resistance and also judicial resistance, especially in countries where there is no democracy or where the executive controls the judiciary and there is no independence of the judiciary. That means that even the cases that are being taken to court relating to environmental protection or even climate change would never be judged on justly because of the compromised judiciary. So all those are challenges and also delays in enforcement. You could even get a judgment in your favor to the effect that, let's say, the government has to reduce the emissions, and enforcing that judgment could be hard, or there could be significant delays to even enforce such a judgment against a government or even against a corporation. So whereas climate change litigation is a good thing, it's for the right cause, it's for a just cause to protect the environment, it also has some challenges. It's not straightforward as we might think. The challenges with enforcement, challenges with respect to the independence of the judiciary, lack of political will in some countries, and there's also challenges in proving causation and harm, and also challenges in proving the legal standing of plaintiffs. So these are some of the challenges that we see. So the question arises, are we doing enough as a generation to protect the environment? Are the protests, the different protests we see, are they effective or they are destructive? Climate change litigation, is it effective or it's more complex and prolonged? If so, what would be the right way to ensure justice for our planet? We need to act now, but as we're acting, we need to ensure that we balance the three main pillars of sustainability. That is the environmental pillar, economic pillar, and also the social pillar. Because it's through that balance that we shall be able to have a level playing field for the polluters, people who are polluting, and the corporations that are polluting, and the people who are trying to protect the environment. We need a level playing field to ensure that we are all on the same stage. We cannot sometimes stop these economic activities that are associated with climate change, but we can put measures in place to reduce on the emissions through through employment of clean technologies like carbon capture and storage, and also cutting down on the emissions. In the energy sector, we know about the energy transition where countries try to shift to a low carbon economy, try to utilize clean energy, renewables like solar, wind, hydro. So we have to do all we can to try to protect the environment, because at the end of the day, if we cannot protect the planet where we are, how will it protect us? So we protect the environment, we protect our planet, and then the planet will also protect us and provide for us. Otherwise, we cannot be so comfortable in spending so much time on the news about floodings, about heat waves, about droughts, about people losing their lives because of all these impacts of climate change. We have to act in a way that will ensure that we balance the economic aspects and also the environmental aspects. But at the center of all this are the people, the society that also needs to be protected. So that's it about climate change litigation, and look out for more cases in your own countries. See how effective is climate change litigation in your own country, and then give your opinion. Do you want to join the movement when it comes to climate change litigation? Do you think peaceful protests are better? Like, what should be the best way to address climate change and to ensure climate justice? So thank you very much and have a lovely day.